I've seen what the Hydro Archon's like when she's sitting in the audience. In my view, she's a very charismatic speaker, but it's her silences that intrigue me more. Her eyes, they're like the darkness at the bottom of the ocean, hiding a deep secret, afraid of anyone ever getting close to her.
You see, before 4.2, I made a few theories in regards to Furina's character, which I started as a rebuttal against the opinion I saw online about her. You know, those who were calling her a brat, weak, annoying, and useless, as well as a copium argument to those who said that Act 3 was boring and pointless. Little did I know, I hit the nail on those theories, most of them actually. What was once a speculation is now a fact. Furina is not weak. She's the strongest Archon there is. And that is why we're here today. We're gonna revisit Fontaine Archon quest with emphasis on Act 5 and by extension, Furina's story quest and Neuvillette's story quest. If you haven't completed any of the above mentioned quests, you're free to leave this video for now. Do the quest, I will not spoil you, but do consider coming back once you're done, okay? For you who have done it, or haven't but are somehow still here because you don't mind spoilers, let's revisit the trauma that is Fontaine Archon quest and break it down to understand how it established Furina as the strongest Archon in Teyvat. While the opinion of Furina being a weak Archon only started at the end of Act 4, her being annoying had started much earlier, all the way back to the very first encounter with the Hydro Archon in Act 1. Not only did she remind us of Fischl, a theoretical kid who's putting on an act while hiding her true self, but also she presented herself unlike the Archons that we met before. In Mondstadt, we met Venti, who despite his apparent lack of interest in his duty as an Archon, has been protecting the people from the shadow. Then there's Zhongli, who used to govern over Liyue for thousands of years and only recently has decided to step down with a contract to end all contracts. There's A in the far secluded land of Inazuma, who used to be feared because of the extreme measure that she took to reach eternity, but is eventually respected for her perseverance after spending 500 years in a time pocket fighting her own puppet to prove her newly found definition of eternity. In Sumeru, there is Nahida, who by appearance is younger than Furina, but all of us could agree that she's the wisest of them all, not to mention the most useful to the traveler in the past 3 years. And then there is Furina.
Welcome you to the nation of Hydro, and acknowledge the value and significance of your trip.
Who not only came to us, but also appeared to be all-knowing from the get-go with how she could know travel was coming before they even set foot on Fontaine, only for it to be revealed that she got a tip from this NPC who eavesdropped on our conversation with Dia in Caravan Ribat. But then came the infamous magic show by Lini and Lynette, and for a brief moment there, we got a glimpse of a different side of Furina. One was when Lynette disappeared inside a water tank, and then another when this guard dissolved into water at the end of Lini's trial. The proof that Fontainians could dissolve into water was happening right before her eyes, and for a split second, she looked genuinely worried. Further contradiction was presented when we talked to Neuvillette after we paid respect to Navia's father at the end of Act 2. Furina has been collecting intel from all around Teyvat, he said, and that she had been trying to figure out a way to deal with the prophecy. Not to mention, we heard a more mature version of her voice in the 4.1 trailer and in Neuvillette's story quest, as well as her crying voice in the Fountain of Lucine. Well, those two voices are Furina's, alright, but trying to reconcile all these contradicting images was no easy task. Then came Act 4 along with the revelation that Arlecchino tried to murder Furina before Act 3 even began. Furina was under some kind of curse, Arlecchino said. Furina was the weakest Archon, everybody else concluded, to which I disagreed, and I talked about it at length in this video, which you can check out later if you want. The point I made was, sure, at face value, Furina might come off as an ignorant, weak, and annoying Archon, but simply because an Archon had not shown their true power yet, it didn't mean they're weak. In fact, with how duality-coded Furina was, there's gotta be another side of her, and it just hadn't made it to the surface yet. However, took their time developing Furina's character, allowing our frustration for her lack of apparent care about her nation's fate to grow, to bubble up with the loss of Melus and Silver, so that when we saw everyone conspiring against her, it felt justified. And justified not we were. Furina had hinted on it before. Fontaine would be saved, she said, but only as long as she could keep at it, doing whatever she'd been doing, holding trial after trial, being the flamboyant celebrity Archon that she was, and surely, eventually, that would save Fontaine. She failed to tell us how exactly, and so there we were, pushing her to a corner so that we could get her to spell it out for us. During that trial, more than Furina, who had been refusing to share information with us, or the big whale that we saw at the end of Act 4, Traveler, Paimon, and the rest of the Fontaine characters seem more like the villain of the story to me. Not to be confused with protagonists, of course, we go through the story following the Traveler's point of view, and for that, we are the protagonists of the story. But as it turns out, the end goal of Fontaine Archon quest was to let the flood come to pass, with Furina acting out the part of the Hydro Archon, and what did we do? We tried to stop that from happening, trying to get Furina to spit out the truth, which would end up ruining Focalors' plan, and for that, we're the villain of the story. So, following this thought process, this might explain why the fight with the all-devouring Norwell didn't feel like the final boss fight at all. It was mediocre at best, because that giant whale was not the big boss villain. We were. We were the ultimate villain of Fontaine, trying to drive Furina off course and ruining Focalors' grand plan to save the nation. Fortunately, Furina's determination to do her part in saving Fontaine to perfection was just too strong for this grand trial to shake. So much so that at one point, Travelers even took a step back. Seeing how Furina dipped her hand into a bowl of primordial seawater just to prove that she was indeed not human, Traveler wondered how Furina was so adamant about it. Why was it more important to her to keep up her facade than to save her own life? Why not just give up? And you know what the saddest part of this whole trial was once you completed the quest and learned the truth? It's that Furina's trial was somewhat similar to Navia's trial early on in this act. Navia was claimed by the audience, the people of Poson, that she was one of them, and for that she was guilty and had to stay with them. As for Furina, the charge against her was basically that she was not an Archon. She was human, they said, just like the rest of the people in court during the trial. Except, Navia had Malus and Silver by her side. They reminded her not to plead guilty and assured Navia that they would be there throughout to protect her. Furina was all by herself. Yet never once we saw her waver under the pressure. She even dipped her hand into the bowl just to keep up her facade. For all she knew, that wasn't watered down primordial seawater in that bowl. She would have definitely dissolved otherwise. Keeping up her facade was indeed more important to her than her own life. That was the justice that belonged to her. Which reminded me of an earlier conversation with Charlotte. What would you do if you died tomorrow? Was what Paimon was asking her basically. How would you enjoy your last moments on Tevat? Charlotte at first pondered that she might actually try to flee Fontaine, but then she quickly rectified herself and said that she would continue doing what she'd been doing.
Oh, but I'm still a journalist first and foremost. That means I have a duty to be reporting from the scene. And secondly, I wouldn't forsake my homeland that easily.
Or as casually put by Sedin,
Still, even if there'd be no more cake tomorrow, that wouldn't keep me from having some today.
I've seen some players saying that this part of Act 5 to be a bit dragging, too slow in comparison to the rest of the story with the impending disaster and all that, but I think it was more of a plot device, really. The storytelling was heavy with foreshadowing, analogy, and all that kind of good stuff, right? So why would this particular sequence be any different? In my opinion, this actually served as an analogy to Furina's view of her role in Fontaine, the duty of being an Archon and keeping up that facade until the very end, the end in which every Fontainian would be saved from the flood. She even said to Traveler that she didn't have the right to come to terms with fate on behalf of everyone else. As long as the final moments hadn't come, it was still not too late. Even if she was pushed to a corner, death looming above her unless she disclosed the truth to everyone, she would not give in. Even if the prophecy came true tomorrow, no, in fact, if Fontaine started flooding tomorrow, that's all the more reason for Furina not to give up. So was it really surprising that Furina, a mere human just as every last Fontainian in court that day, with no hesitation whatsoever would dip her hand into the primordial seawater? After all, quoting the achievement that we got from the Lone Phantom Cell war quest, Fontaine expects that everyone will do their duty. A duty that imprisoned her in that human age and appearance for 500 years and dictated her to live all those years pretending to be somebody else. Now, I wasn't intending to make this video about how on point my theories were, no, but with how the story unfolded, it's impossible not to mention it. I myself was surprised. I mean, do you remember how boring Act 3 was? We were stuck in the fortress of Meropide, doing daily routines with little to no autonomy whatsoever, while trying to figure out where Child disappeared to and how. Yet by the end of it, we didn't even get to find Child and drag him back to Arlecchino. Weird. Weird because that act was preceded by two amazing acts, both heavy in character exploration and foreshadowing. Then came this act and it was basically a prison simulator? It was only after I considered Furina's duality, her apparent lack of knowledge and plan to deal with the prophecy combined with her never-ending intel-gathering activity, that it started to make sense. I talk about it in detail in this other video, which you can also check out later if you feel like it. In summary, I theorize that Act 3 served as an analogy to Furina's life in the never-ending 5-century-long imprisonment imposed on her. She had an objective to achieve before she could be relieved from that role, just as we had before we could get out of prison. And an analogy it was. While Neuvillette was talking to Focalors, we got an invitation to a performance starring the one and only Furina. We witnessed how she spent her days in the opera house, went to see a trial, delegated tasks to Neuvillette, held an audience with her people, collected intel on possible solutions to the prophecy, and repeat, all the while wondering if the next trial was gonna be the grand and dramatic trial Mirror Her was talking about. Roughly around 499 years, 3 months, and 27 days was she stuck in that real-life performance. A real-life imprisonment, I would say. A true battle of the spirit, Raiden A called it. One that even her 500-year duel against the Raiden Shogun could not compare. She would suffer, Furina knew that, but even from the very beginning, from when Focalors first invited her to play the role, she didn't hesitate. And suffered she did. A drop of her sadness and loneliness converged all the way to the Fountain of Lucine.
So interminable. So lonely. Just how much longer?
If that doesn't sound messed up to you yet, consider this. Focalors never shared the full detail of her plan to Furina. Unlike Traveler and Paimon, who were clear about their prison mission, aside from the fact that she had to pretend to be a god and that she would suffer throughout, nothing about the plan was clear to Furina. How long did she have to pretend to be the Hydro Archon? A long time, Focalors said. Why did she have to do that? Because in the meantime, Focalors needed to do something that would save Fontaine. What was that something? Furina never knew, because in order to deceive everyone else, especially the Heavenly Principal, Focalors had to deceive herself first. So when Neuvillette confronted her and Furina replied with,
Just trust in me, your Archon, and do as I say. Never mind whether you can truly convince yourself to or not. It'll all turn out fine.
It might as well be an advice she was telling herself. Her spirit had broken long ago. She had started to question how much longer she had to keep up the act. She had no clue what Mirror Her's plan was, yet Furina trusted her anyway. Everything would turn out fine. If she just kept at it, everybody in Fontaine would be saved. And so I felt sin when I heard the anger in Neuvillette's voice upon learning the truth from Focalors. Anger towards Focalors, yes, for making Furina go through all that, but perhaps anger towards himself as well. While the trial did take place all because of Furina's refusal to cooperate and disclose the truth, Neuvillette was the one who proposed the idea of a trial and set things in motion. Making Furina be on the spot, exposed for all Fontainians to judge, that was very much Focalors' plan all along as well as his doing. Unwittingly, he became an actor in the 5-year-long play. While Focalors did tell Furina of the part that she had to play to save Fontaine, Neuvillette knew nothing. While Furina had to embody a god, one that is close to what humans imagine gods to be, Neuvillette's task was to walk among humans, to see them for who they were, to feel as how they felt, to understand humanity. In a way, Furina is the most god a human can be, while Neuvillette is the most human a god can be. Focalors was as much a genius as she was a gambler, really. Unlike us who gamble on our favorite character banners, she gambled on Furina's perseverance. She trusted Furina to never waver and to always keep up the act until she didn't have to any longer. And she gambled on Neuvillette as well. She gambled on him to come to an understanding of humanity so that when the time came, He would be the spokesperson for Fontaine and give his just judgment for the people. Notice how it was only after she heard Neuvillette's verdict that Focalors decided it was time for the execution? I mean, think about it. She was the one who created the Oratrice, the machine that would kill the Hydro Archon. It only made sense that she would be the one who could decide when the execution should take place. It was only after Neuvillette told her that he had gained so much understanding of humanity, had walked among humans long enough that by that point, how could he ever deem them guilty? That little smile at the end? That's the smile of someone who just won the biggest 50-50 against Celestia. When all was said and done, when we had learned about the endless loneliest performance Furina had been doing, when the curtain call came for the sinner and was time for the execution of the Hydro Archon, neither of them were sacrifices. While a nation might be saved at the expense of one person's suffering and a god's death, that was not trade. They were not the price to pay for humanity. They were heroes who saved one. With the death of a god, the authority of a dragon sovereign was restored, and chains that shackled Focalors both to her divine throne and a human life cursed with immortality were lifted. Long gone was her divinity. No longer was she consigned to dance upon that lonely isle, secluded from human interaction and intimacy for fear of revealing her true identity. So surely, once the last light had dimmed on her 5-century-long performance, once she had pulled herself out of the solitude that she thought was her fate entailed by the newly obtained freedom, it was no surprise that a vision would appear before her. While visions are usually objects that are granted in response to humankind's ambition, this one in particular was a reward for her perseverance, granted by the now highest authority in all of Fontaine, by Furina's #1 supporter. Fontaine Archon Quest has its ups and downs, good moments and bad ones, and while we had to wait until the very last act to fully understand Furina's character, all the foreshadowing and analogy planted throughout made it worthwhile. Some found her to be annoying before the big reveal, but when the curtain call came for the sinner, the shock came in like a flood, drowning us all in grievance. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.